I've been right. I got to be president 3 times.
But why would Charlie Kirk's security detail call Ben Shapiro's security detail when Ben Shapiro wasn't even anywhere near the Utah University where Charlie Kirk was shot and killed, as Charlie Kirk was in the back of a car being transported to a hospital? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. That's not a story we're going to be covering today, but it is a question that many should be asking. Maybe we'll cover that tomorrow. Today, though, we've got so much to get to. Obviously, the war is back on with Iran, and I want to give you the latest updates on that. In fact, some news broke just before we went live today, so I can't wait to get to that story. Afterward, we're going to talk a little bit about the economic ramifications of the fact that we are now seeing kinetic action, bombings between the United States and Iran in the Middle East once again. I'll talk a little bit about oil prices, what the markets are looking like. We'll also discuss the fact that the Trump administration just spent $1.5 billion in American taxpayer money to purchase 2 private prisons, which will continue to be privately run but publicly owned, in order to ensure that those facilities can skirt regulations. And we're going to also discuss why investors are pulling out of investing in Palantir. You know, you think Palantir is just unbreakable, unshakable, but some investors think otherwise. So we'll tell you why in the second hour of the show. As always, just want to encourage you guys to like and share the stream. If you're watching us live, it's a great, quick, easy way to help support the show and the work we do here. You can also become a paying member and get some of the perks that come along with membership, including keeping us independent, by going to tyt.com/join. All right, folks, let's get right to it.
Is the ceasefire done? Is the MOU dead?
It's a very interesting question. To me, I think it's over.
Why are you apparently unable to end the Iran war?
I'm number 1 on the list for killing. They're a little loco. They're a little crazy.
Who's a little loco and who's a little crazy? Unfortunately, Trump isn't really engaging in a moment of self-reflection, but nonetheless, the memorandum of understanding, which was supposed to essentially create a path to a peace deal with Iran, appears to be collapsing, completely falling apart. In fact, right before I went live, there were some breaking news stories in regard to some of the strikes that the United States is carrying out against Iran. And it does appear that these strikes are a little more strategic than previous strikes. These are meant to attempt to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. ABC confirms with Trump officials that the new ongoing U.S. strikes on Iran are, yes, bigger than the previous strikes when it appeared the MOU was going to fall apart, but didn't. They're striking coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile sites, and IRGC C2, exactly targets relevant for the Marines to seize Keshem Island or Karg Island in the Gulf. Now, the thinking behind that is it would further cripple Iran's economic well-being. I mean, whatever is left of Iran's economic well-being. But it's unclear whether or not this military strategy would work. If there were a military option available to the Trump administration, to the Pentagon, they certainly would have carried it out earlier. They appear to feel a little more, I don't know, prepared to carry out such a military operation. Whether or not they would be successful, I'm not an expert, and I'm going to wait to actually research this and speak to experts about it. But let me give you some more details about what Trump has been saying in regard to the MOU, which really does appear to have collapsed at this point. So as we reported yesterday, the latest bombing exchange all started after Iran struck, some sources saying 2, other sources saying 3 vessels that were attempting to transit along an unapproved path through the Strait of Hormuz. So that unapproved path that I'm referring to is actually closer to the Omani side in the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran wants commercial ships to sail near their shore for obvious reasons. Their real leverage in this conflict is the fact that they have control over the strait. And so they want to ensure that that control remains under Iran, and they want to ensure that these vessels specifically transit through the approved Iran path. Now, vessels kept, breaking that rule. And over the weekend, as we shared with you, Iran had warned that they will retaliate, they will attack any of the vessels that are traveling through that Oman route. And I should note, the United States is specifically pushing for the Oman route in the Strait of Hormuz in order to weaken Iran's ability to control transit through the strait. So that is what the Trump administration is attempting to do. Iran obviously identified what the Trump administration is doing, and so they retaliated against those vessels. One of them was a Qatari vessel, the other, I believe, from Saudi Arabia. The Qatari vessel was carrying liquefied natural gas. Luckily, it was empty at the time, so it wasn't transporting liquefied natural gas at the time. And I say luckily because it would have exploded. But nonetheless, that is what later led to the United States carrying out what you're about to see on your screens. So just yesterday, CENTCOM announced that they had carried out what they referred to as powerful strikes on Iran. This is on Tuesday. So explosions were seen in Qeshm Island and the port cities of Bandar Abbas and Shirak. In fact, what you're seeing is Bandar Abbas, which was obviously targeted. Now, US officials claim that the strikes targeted military sites, while Iran's main broadcaster is arguing the opposite. They say that most of these attacks by the United States carried civilian areas. But based on what I'm seeing in regard to the bombings in the port area and all of that, I wouldn't be surprised. The US says that they had 80 targets. That's a lot of targets. Okay, so would I be surprised or shocked that they struck civilian infrastructure? No, I would not be surprised. But right now, I'm seeing a mix. I'm seeing certainly these strategic economic hubs being targeted, the ports and things like that. Now, the military's central command said on social media that it had hit more than 80 targets, as I mentioned, with precision munitions, about 7 times the number of targets hit in the most recent strikes in Iran on June 26th and 27th. That was the previous time where we thought, okay, they're, trading fire. It appears that the war is back on. But luckily, things kind of calmed down after that. Unfortunately, because of what's been transpiring in the Strait of Hormuz, we're now seeing more kinetic action. And what's really worrying about the situation is that Trump is being a lot more brazen about how he no longer wants to pursue diplomatic means, and he just wants to pursue military operations that I'm not sure are going to really accomplish much. So since we've caved into the Israelification of our military operations, a US official told CNN that the US strikes were not proportional and described them as punishment toward Iran, adding that the attacks won't be over for a bit. So obviously that's a US official letting the American people know this is going to continue. This isn't going to be like the previous time when we exchanged fire. And also a US official told Axios that the strikes were 4 or 5 times bigger than the bombing of Iran's coast, which happened 10 days ago. So the IRGC did respond. And of course, since they don't have the capacity or capability to hit mainland USA, they're going to keep attacking our Gulf allies, which hosted American bases, much to their detriment, as they're learning. And so the IRGC in turn clarified to have attacked 85 US military sites across the region, including the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain and Ali Al Shalem Air Base in Kuwait, and said 8 were destroyed. So with all of this context in mind, I wanted you guys to know the finer details of this story. Like what happens with that MOU that the United States and Iran signed on June 18th. Well, here's what Trump had to say.
Is the ceasefire done? Is the MOU dead?
It's a very interesting question. To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it.
Okay. So look, it's really hard for me to take anything that Trump has to say seriously when it was his administration that decided to carry out surprise strikes against Iran in the middle of peace negotiations, not once, but twice. It is hard for me to take Trump seriously when he's calling anyone else scum. Look, Iran has its faults, okay? The IRGC isn't angelic, but I am an American who is represented or supposed to be represented by the American government in a supposed democracy, right? I get it, constitutional republic, but you guys get what I mean. Like we decide who our representatives are, who our senators are based on elections, that's democracy. And we vote for president. And what we have right now is a government that seems far less interested in representing what's in the best interests of Americans. But my point in taking jabs against my own government more than anything is it's my government. It's what we, the people, should feel responsible for to some extent, even though our government is corrupt and doesn't really represent what we want. But like, if you're going to fearmonger or try to drum up support for a war against a country like Iran, it's just a lot more difficult to do it when you refuse to take responsibility over the fact that you bombed a girls' elementary school in the opening salvo of this war on February 28th. You killed 168 little kids and won't even take any responsibility for it, won't apologize for it. You want to talk about scum? And look, Trump also bitched and moaned about how, Iran allegedly has an active assassination plot against him, which by the way has been a talking point by Benjamin Netanyahu without providing a shred of evidence. So clearly Netanyahu's in his ear, but hold on. Are we now saying that it's immoral to assassinate world leaders, President Trump? Because isn't that literally what you did to Iran? So like, I think the biggest issue I'm having right now, and it's not just indicative of the Trump administration, it is now so normalized in our federal government, in the executive branch, that like we never stop and have a moment of self-reflection. We never stop to think about the consequences of our actions, the concept of blowback. I don't want to act like Israel. I don't want to act like we're innocent angels and others hate us for no reason other than they're jealous of us. They're so jealous of us. No, that's like lunatic talk. Anyway, and look, if you ask me, and we're gonna have Trita Parsi on later in the show, and I definitely want to ask him about this. I don't think there was ever a good faith attempt at forging ahead with a peace deal. And the reason why I genuinely don't believe it, and I have the evidence to prove it, is because JD Vance like handed it to me on a silver platter. All you have to do is listen carefully to what they tell us. They tell us exactly who they are, so believe them. Here's JD Vance.
So I think what the president has told us to do is use this MOU to sort of refill the world's oil economy. Yeah. To refill some stocks and then to see where the hand is.
You hear that? So the MOU was never about, taking one closer step to a possible peace deal. It was never about that. It was about the fact that the United States and Israel were, and probably still are, running out of missile interceptors. It was about the fact that the global economy was about to collapse. And President Donald Trump knew that we were quickly running out of our strategic oil reserves, petroleum reserves. It was always about the fact that the Trump administration needed a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of breathing room, if you will, to charge up a little bit like a cheap iPhone battery. Like just try to recharge and get ready for more kinetic action. It was never about peace. That's my view of this. And I'm honestly sick of being played for a fool, okay, by our own government. They're lying to us. We were never prepared to enter this war to begin with. It was a dumb war to begin with. But I don't think that the Trump administration could have continued on without that pause in fighting. But now it seems like they feel emboldened to continue the war. And that appears to be what's happening as we speak. Now, even though the war is being reignited, Trump believes that the United States already won. So let's take a look at that.
Why are you apparently unable to end the Iran war?
So I think we're doing just the opposite. The Iran war has been a tremendous military success. And, I can only answer the question by saying they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. Look, they have no military left. Their air force is gone. As I said, their ships are gone. 159 ships are gone. They're at the bottom of the sea. Their radar is gone. Everything's gone. So when you say not a success, it's a tremendous success. The fake news likes to say how well they're doing. They're doing terribly. They want to make a deal, but they don't know how to make a deal. And then they go around shooting ships at night. I don't like that. They're dealing with very fine people. They're dealing with Steve Witkoff. They're dealing with Jared Kushner and J.D. Vance. And they're dealing with Marco and Scott. They're dealing with great people. But I don't know. I think they're a little loco. They're a little crazy.
He just listed off people like Steve Witkoff, a real estate guy, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, as wonderful people, great people, as if they're, look, understand something. I know that our media, sorry, I have allergies, so my eyes are watering up. I'm not emotional right now, but our media kind of hides this, but it's something that I really want the audience to kind of be aware of, because it speaks to how we are perceived on the world stage. During these peace negotiations, Trump sends his like 2-bit real estate guy and his son-in-law, who's known Benjamin Netanyahu since he was a kid, to engage in peace negotiations with the Iranian delegation, and they send like PhDs, experts, like serious people. Like this is not a serious government that we're dealing with here in the United States. So when you're referring to nuclear material as nuclear dust, I just, do you know the difference of enriching uranium to a very, very low percentage for energy reasons? Do you understand how, like, what the giant gap is between 3.5% enrichment and 60% enrich or 90% enrichment? I don't know. It's a real estate guy and Donald Trump's like creepy son-in-law. Okay, so I don't know, but we are not perceived as a serious country right now. And it freaking pains me because I don't think our people deserve it. Anyway, and just before the US carried out strikes, the Treasury Department, as we mentioned yesterday, but it bears repeating, did revoke Iran's oil sanction waiver. So that allowed Iran to trade oil. And so after the oil waivers were reversed, the US official told Al Arabia that Iran will only reap the benefits of the MOU if they exhibit good behavior. The official added that Iran's actions were wholly unacceptable and will be met with consequences. And of course, that is a reference to Iran striking those vessels which were transiting through an unapproved route through the Strait of Hormuz. But it is rich, certainly, to hear any American official talk about good or bad behavior. I think we need to spend just a minute reflecting on our own behavior and the way that we're perceived on the international stage, because that perception is important when it comes to the future of this country, when it comes to diplomatic deals that need to be made. I mean, I'd love to believe that the United States doesn't ever have to have any diplomatic relations with any country, no deals with any country ever again. We're totally independent. We're self-sufficient. We don't need to work with anyone else. That's just not the real world. And so everything we're doing right now weakens the United States and strengthens what I thought we were supposed to be so worried about, China, right? But China be rising, okay? You can't deny it. And we're helping them do it. There's no question. So I want to pivot to one other thing before we go to break, because no, not that one. We'll get to that later. Oh, no, this is outdated is right. Sorry. I'm sorry, guys. You know what? Why don't we take a break? Why don't we take a break? Because we need to, it's time. And when we come back, I'll tell you about the outdated intel that the military knew they were dealing with, but they decided to use that intel to carry out bombings anyway. We'll be right back.
I've been right about everything. That's how I got to be president 3 times.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Well, this is a social break, so I get to interact with you guys. Lots of fun. So let's go to our tyt.com members, where Free Palestine Forever. Thank you for purchasing an annual membership. Welcome to our new member. Same to Maximum Boot, who also purchased a membership. We will be having a bonus episode today where I will be talking about my debut as an S poster. I can't say the word, which is like ironic because, if you're gonna be one of those posters, you should say the word, but I can't. Anyway, if you are a member though, we're gonna have a lot of fun. We also have some videos from Trump's NATO summit that you do not wanna miss. So definitely stick around if you are a member, tyt.com/join to become one. Let's go to Bloated Ego, who says, if Israel attacks Turkey, we'd be obligated to help defend Turkey against Israel. Whoo boy. I really do wonder how that would play out. But I mean, honestly, you use obligated, but obligated by whom? I mean, obviously, we've been aiding and abetting the dismantling of international law, especially with the beginning of the genocide, which started under Biden. Biden aided and abetted it, and Trump kind of put the nail in the coffin, if you ask me. I don't think they care about international law. I think Trump would do whatever he wants, and he probably would attack Turkey. Actually, I don't know. Who knows? We got to find out, I guess.
I've been right about everything. That's how I got to be president 3 times.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's talk a little bit about how hot it is. It's summertime. Heat waves are happening. People are sweating. It's muggy in certain places. The last thing you want to do is be hot when you're trying to sleep. So we're looking to help you out. And we're gonna do that by offering you a deal with ChiliPad, one of our sponsors. So ChiliPad does exactly what you would think it would do with a name like that, okay? So it's a water-based mattress topper that actively controls your bed temperature from 55 to 115 degrees all night long. So if you want to get a little bit of a discount, okay, you could get up to $255 off your ChiliPad 2.0 by using the code TYT when you purchase your ChiliPad topper over at www.sleep.me/TYT. So that's sleep.me/TYT. Use the promo code TYT and you can get up to $255 off, which is pretty badass. So you're welcome. All right, everybody. So let's get to that story that I wanted to do before I realized it was time to go to break. Because to me, it's really important to understand what happened with that bombing of the elementary school in Manab, Iran. And we're starting to get a little more clarity about some of the bad decision making behind the scenes leading up to that horrific moment of a mass civilian casualty. So it turns out that the United States military was using outdated intelligence when it decided to carry out a strike that ultimately hit a an elementary school in Manab, Iran, killing 168 children. The total death toll ended up being 175 people. And what's really horrific about this situation is clearly there was a moment where the military could make a decision. Do we double check or do we move forward with the bombing? And it wasn't just one bomb. Remember, we're talking about a double tap strike. So let's get into the details here. CNN reports that the US military commanders bypassed warnings about the use of outdated intel, and that led to the double tap bombing of this elementary school. So messages indicating the intelligence was based on years old intelligence that needed to be re-vetted were embedded in a system used for developing targets and required a senior officer to approve adding a site to the strike first. Okay, do you guys understand that? That means that there were people in the military, commanders in the military, who knew they were dealing with outdated intel. It wasn't an accident. The point that I'm trying to make is it wasn't an accident. Rather than re-vetting that intel, which was flagged as possibly very outdated, the military commanders decided, no, we're gonna go ahead with a double tap strike anyway. And look, I want to believe that everyone cares about protecting human lives, period, especially the lives of little girls, little children. But if you fall in that camp that I wish to never be in, where you don't care about the loss of innocent lives, you only care about maybe America, maybe you only care about your neighborhood or lives within your context, understand what these types of mass casualty events do to a society that's been victimized by it. And how when it comes to national security threats, it would probably be more conducive to not carry out mass casualty, civilian casualty events like this. If you want to maintain your national security and not draw the ire of other countries, other world leaders, you guys get the point, right? But let me continue. The targeting databases known as the Modernized Integrated Database, or MIDB, and the Machine Assisted Analytic Rapid Repository System, or MARS, clearly indicated that the information related to Iranian targets needed to be updated before use, two of the sources said. So interesting things are kind of happening right now. As we know, artificial intelligence is being introduced to various elements of the Defense Department. So the MIDB is the Pentagon's older targeting system, and it was built in the 1980s and largely relies on manual input from analysts. The MARS system, though, is the department's newer system that relies on artificial intelligence powered digital. It's like an artificial intelligence powered digital platform that was put into operational use earlier this year. And later will replace MIDB. But right now, both systems are being used, which I guess that's better than just relying on like an untested AI model. But nonetheless, I mean, both models are irrelevant when you have military commanders who don't even bother to re-vet their intel before carrying out devastating strikes. Both systems are being used, but the effort to shift entirely to MARS, that's the AI-powered system, is years behind schedule, and authoritative targeting data still relies on MIDB, according to a source familiar with recently revised Pentagon guidance. So both systems are being used, but remember, the older system requires manual inputs by analysts. And so the decision by senior commanders to ignore the warnings was made for expediency. Two of the sources said, we can't wait to bomb. We can't wait to bomb. So we can't re-vet our intel. We can't wait to drop the bombs. So they did it for expediency. In a rush to provide targets at the start of the war, but it also directly contributed to the accidental. I like how CNN used accidental. Can you really call it an accident when you made a conscious decision not to re-vet the intel and you carried out a double tap strike anyway? Can you really call it an accident? Anyway, the strike killed at least 168 children and 14 teachers, making the strike one of the worst civilian casualty incidents in recent US military history. Again, I think the best way to describe this is the Israelification of U.S. foreign policy and the way we conduct war. And that is not a place I want to be, that's for sure. All right, well, let's move on to how all of this is impacting the global economy, because we are not in for a treat. Let's get to it.
Is the ceasefire done? Is the MOU dead?
It's a very interesting question. To me, I think it's over.
What's up with the dramatics, Trump? Like, what was that? Anyway, now President Donald Trump has confirmed that the memorandum of understanding, which was supposed to eventually lead to a peace deal between the United States and Iran, is over. The bombing has begun. The US is carrying out some pretty significant strikes against Iran. Iran is retaliating by hitting our Gulf allies, which have hosted US bases. Now, that's going to have an impact not just on our anxiety levels, but also an impact on the global economy. And so as soon as Trump made that announcement, as soon as it was clear that the ceasefire was over, well, we noticed that the oil prices are skyrocketing, and there are some, terrifying indicators in the market as well. So let's get to the details. So prior to the US carrying out this new set of strikes against Iran, and it all started yesterday, of course, the Treasury Department did something. They revoked Iran's oil sanctions. Well, they provided Iran with waivers when it comes to oil sanctions, which is great considering the fact that with the Strait of Hormuz being closed, or with transit pretty much coming to a halt and then opening up to a trickle, there was a lack of oil supply. And so allowing for that waiver was an important way of getting more oil supply in the global economy. That's why Trump did it. Think about how insane that is. We are going to enter a war with you. I'm going to lift these sanctions temporarily, though, so you can sell oil. Because the war, of course, has the consequence of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, which is devastating to the global economy. But anyway, last month, the Treasury Department issued a general license allowing Iran to produce, sell, and deliver oil for 2 months. That was part of the MOU. That is now gone. Okay? So the Iranian sanctions waiver was designed to give Iran greater access to American currency by allowing the country to conduct oil transactions using US dollars. And that's helpful to us because the US would like to maintain the petrodollar. If that were to change, we would be in a lot more trouble. There would be a lot less flexibility in our economy, if you will, if other countries decided to move off the petrodollar. It also allowed the American importers to buy Iranian crude oil, petrochemical products, and petroleum products. Okay, so all of that is gone now because the war has been reignited. And there is no deal. There is no path to peace at this moment. I know there are some very naive yet optimistic people out there who are like, no, there's still a chance. I don't know. I don't think the United States ever engaged in peace negotiations with Iran in good faith. And today, oil prices did spike to their highest levels in weeks. I want to note, though, it's not devastating yet. So let's take a look at this chart. So the price of Brent crude oil rose more than 7% to nearly $80 a barrel today. So obviously, there's an increase of 7%. There's no question that Trump's decision to reignite this war already has a negative impact on the price of oil. However, it's not passing, over $100 a barrel yet. Like the longer the war drags on, the worse the price will be. And remember, we have been depleting our strategic petroleum reserves in order to keep the price of oil as low as we can. China actually stopped buying oil on the global market because they have the largest oil reserves, I think, globally. And so they've been kind of relying on that. That has managed to keep the price of oil down, even despite the devastation of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, opened a little bit, closed again, opened a little bit, closed. You know what I mean? So it's closed right now. And we're already starting to see the negative impact. But if you're wondering, how the hell was the price of oil so low, given the trickle of transit that was taking place at the Strait of Hormuz, before all this kinetic action took place beginning yesterday? Well, it's because the full, volume of transit was never recovered. You still only had a trickle of commercial vessels transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. So for the last few weeks, the price of oil hovered at around $72 per barrel, which was close to pre-war levels. And again, I explained how that was able to happen. Now, Daniela Hawthorne, who's an analyst over at Capital.com, said something interesting. She said that investors had viewed the ceasefire as fragile, but ultimately durable. These are like the most optimistic people on the planet. Like their mental health relies on the optimism. So they tell themselves pretty little lies about how like, yeah, the MOU is fragile, but also durable. Also durable. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so investors had viewed the ceasefire as fragile, but ultimately durable until Trump's comments on Wednesday called that into question. Any suggestion that negotiations have collapsed raises the risk of renewed supply interruptions or tighter sanctions. Well, the sanctions are here again. And obviously there are supply interruptions because the Strait of Hormuz is seeing, ships being targeted and struck, and Iran, whether Trump likes it or not, still maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Joint Maritime Information Center, which is a multinational organization that kind of assesses the threats of high-risk shipping, said just yesterday that the risk of sending ships through the strait was severe, up from substantial, with further hostile action considered likely under current conditions. So then you have Kepler, that's a maritime data company, reporting that 41 ships passed through the strait in both directions before the war. More than 130 ships a day routinely passed through the choke point between Iran and Oman. Many of the vessels that went through the strait this week used the Iranian corridor, which the Iranian authorities are trying to assert more control over the waterway, have said is the only viable route. Iran is not going to let go of their control of the strait. They never really needed a nuclear weapon as a deterrent because before the war, their very likely control of the strait, if they get provoked, was the leverage that they needed. And unfortunately, it didn't stop the Trump administration from starting the war. I don't think Trump was smart enough to realize what a disastrous and devastating, mistake he would be making. Other presidents were smart enough to realize it, even if I thought they were idiotic in many other ways. But Trump decided to start the war, and what did Iran do? All right, well, we're going to take over the Strait of Hormuz, and that is their leverage now. And so every military expert that isn't part of Trump's cult says that there is no military option to snatch control away from Iran. I know that the United States is trying right now. We'll see how it goes, but I'd rather trust the military experts. They know more than I do when it comes to these types of things. Now, in regard to the global economy, though, the ceasefire with Iran has already caused a dip in the stock market. So the war overall is affecting the global economy, and in multiple ways, guys. We've gone over this. I don't want to be too redundant, but it isn't just oil or liquefied natural gas that transits through the strait. What also is being transported globally through the Strait of Hormuz is 1/3 of the world's fertilizer, which is of course required for farmers to grow the food that we rely on. So we're going to see our global food supply take a massive hit. Obviously, global energy supply is taking a massive hit. We have a huge problem right now with the fact that we've depleted our, strategic petroleum reserve. I don't think that's a good thing. And there doesn't really seem to be a way to refill it unless Trump is willing to take. Look, if Trump wants to keep oil prices down here in the United States by preventing the international trade of the oil and natural gas that's produced here in the US, that would be a choice. I don't think he's going to do that though. And in fact, I think what he's done is tap into our strategic petroleum reserve and allow for oil companies to sell it globally in order to kind of ward off the ire of various international players who should be very furious with us because we started this war, and it's not just impacting our economy or Iran's economy, it's impacting the global economy. And so, according to the International Monetary Fund, the global economy was already slowing down prior to the war against Iran being reignited recently. Global output growth is poised to fall 3% in 2026 from 3.5% last year. That is slightly slower than the fund's April projection of 3.1% growth, underscoring the protracted nature of the conflict. And keep in mind, this forecast was put out by the IMF before we reignited the war against Iran. And so getting back to the IMF's data, the IMF expects global inflation to rise to 4.7% in 2026 from 4.1% in 2025 because of elevated commodity prices. Gee, I wonder why we would have elevated commodity prices. So this war is so disastrous. It doesn't necessarily mean we need to panic at the moment, but remember, the longer the war drags on, the longer the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the more likely we are to experience a global economic depression. And Trump said prior to even signing the MOU, that he doesn't want to be the next Herbert Hoover. I mean, we do see Hoovervilles all over the place here in the United States, all again, right? All over again. But it seems like Trump, on one hand, understands the issue at play here, understands that we're barreling toward a massive iceberg, but he doesn't want to accept the consequences of the really, really bad decision he made by starting this war. And that consequence is Iran won. And the spoils of war is that they have the Strait of Hormuz and they get to charge a toll. They're calling it something else, but it is what it is. Everyone, well, not everyone, I should be very careful, but many people predicted this. Previous administrations predicted this, which is why, as much as they would, go out on a limb for Israel, they would not attack Iran. But Trump did it. Trump did it. Anyway, we got to move on. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about Spain. We're not going to be trading with Spain anymore, supposedly. Trump doesn't have the power to do it unilaterally, blah, 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 blah. Like he's a clown and very embarrassing, but we got to move on to other things. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the trip that Hegseth was supposed to take to Israel, but it got canceled. Why? We'll be right back. All right, everybody. Let's go to our, there's a lot of super chats. Okay, here we go. We've got Chrono Hop, who says, Democrats in Congress are so useless. I already love this. Thank you for your comment. How many pretended to be against the war until it came time to vote on war powers? They kept delaying. Now he'll claim he gets another 60 days before needing congressional approval. You are speaking my language. Like I'm so sick of Democrats are so much better than Republicans. They're all trash. They're all trash. Okay, they are not representing us. Chrono Hop also says, we need as many people as possible to file federal lawsuits against the government for violating the Arms Control Act. Pretending Israel doesn't have nukes is like saying stealing is borrowing. I don't know why there aren't more lawsuits. I agree with you, actually, but I doubt any of that is going to happen. Mike Galasso, thank you so much for the super chat. We have YTP renewed. How does breaking the rule not constitute trespass? I don't know. Good question. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Before we get to our next story, I will talk a little bit about the Spain trade issue in just a second, but I want to read a few more super chats. Let's start with Constantine Kaviris. Thank you so much for the super chat, and thank you for the happy birthday wishes. Have you heard of Ben Jordan? He has some excellent videos on flock cameras that are both informative to me, master's degree in computer science, and accessible to those without a technical background. I'd highly recommend it. I'll definitely check it out. I was actually talking to my sister-in-law about flock cameras today because she's a police officer. And so she's like, they're all over Florida and they are useful for, catching bad guys. But she also agreed that, it's scary and there's a lot of surveillance going on. And it's kind of unfair to indiscriminately stalk Americans who aren't a risk or a threat to anyone. Anyway, we'll talk about that probably later on some other episode of the show. That's a big issue that people are fired up about. But for now, I want to get back to economic issues because Trump's little tiff with Spain is likely to cause issues with our allies, but unlikely to really amount to anything real. So let's get to it. All right. Well, Trump reigniting the war with Iran is not really great news for the economy, certainly not the global economy. But when it comes to the US economy, Trump has also made other mistakes, like his ham-handed tariffs. And now that he's in Ankara, Turkey for the NATO summit, he's decided to turn Spain into more of an adversary, which is nonsensical if you ask me. So what happened? What did Trump do? Well, he has decided that the United States will end trade with Spain. Didn't we just have a Supreme Court ruling about this? Didn't we just hear from the Supreme Court that these kinds of decisions are supposed to be made by Congress and that the president can't unilaterally make the decision? Yeah. Anyway, it didn't stop Trump from saying this.
Spain is a wasted cause. We don't want to do any trade business with Spain anymore, by the way. I'd like you to cut it off. Spain is a terrible partner in NATO. They don't participate, they don't pay. I don't want anything to do with Spain. Cut off all trade with Spain, please, including visits. Okay, we don't want anything to do. Watch them come running back. Oh, they'll come running back. I don't want to do any more trade with them. All right? Sure. Take it immediately. Don't even talk to them. They're hopeless. Bad people because, they have everybody else going and paying and working in Spain. In particular, Spain. There are a couple of others, but in particular, Spain. They're open about it. They're hostile about it. And let's see how hostile they remain when they call up and they, please, we want to trade with you, sir. We want to trade with you, sir. They make so much money with us, and we're going to see that they make a lot less.
I gotta say, Trump said some pretty favorable things about China. And Turkey is an ally to the United States, a NATO ally, but I don't know. He seems to say a lot of favorable, complimentary things about world leaders that are supposed to be considered our enemies, but he loves to take jabs at our allies. So let's get into why Trump is so salty about Spain. So, some might have forgotten about it, but he's been harshly criticizing Spain for some time now. And in fact, this, tiff goes back to last year. In fact, last year's NATO summit. So Madrid was the, only ally refusing to support the idea of, spending a certain percentage of its gross domestic product on its military, right? So I guess NATO countries had agreed that they're going to spend at least 5% of their GDP on defense by 2035. Trump has repeatedly hammered NATO member countries over their defense spending, pressing each member to meet a spending goal of 5% of its total gross domestic product. Only 5 out of NATO's 32 total member countries are projected. 32 member countries, a lot of countries, man. But okay, 32 member countries are projected to hit that goal by this year. Look, I understand Trump's thinking, which is we are part of this like security alliance. And if you're not spending any money on your military, how can we rely on you to join a fight against an adversary? Like that's the thinking behind it. But Spain's not into it. Spain's like, nah, we're not going to do that. Spain has also been a vocal critic of the Trump administration and its decision to go to war with Iran. So Spain, of course, refused to allow the United States to use military bases in their country for this war against Iran. And the real question is, should we take Trump's threats seriously? I mean, can he unilaterally decide to end all trade with Spain? And the answer is no, he can't. I mean, the Supreme Court literally just ruled on this. Now, additionally, I want to give you some of the potential loopholes, which Trump might argue he can use if he is serious about pursuing an end to all trade with Spain. So according to Reuters, Spanish Prime Minister, I apologize for that. Let's actually go to graphic 9. So under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the president has sweeping powers to restrict or block economic dealings involving foreign countries. However, such a move is only possible if the president can prove that the country in question presents an unusual or extraordinary threat to US national security, foreign policy, or the economy, and declare the situation a national emergency. Now, obviously, Spain doesn't pose a threat to the United States. I don't think that he could actually invoke, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Will he try? Who knows? What I know without a shadow of a doubt is Trump likes to talk out of his ass. And he says all sorts of things that he doesn't even necessarily mean. And that's a problem when the leader of one of the most powerful countries on the globe can't be trusted because he just speaks off the cuff and says insane things. No one's gonna trust the United States. No one's gonna wanna make deals with the United States. And I think the way that we're currently using our military right now, it looks like a country that's losing power, losing control, and kind of lashing out. And I hate that it's my country. I don't think it has to be. I don't think it needs to be, but that's just the reality of the matter. So going back to Reuters, they had reported what the Prime Minister of Spain had to say. So Pedro Sanchez's office said it was treating Trump's comments on Tuesday as business as usual, and that it did not intend to change what it called Spain's excellent trade relations with the United States. We're not taken seriously, and that's not good. That's not good. Okay, let's do one final story before we take a break and bring Trita Parsi in. I've got so many questions to ask him, and I want to play that JD Vance video for him and see what he thinks about it. But before we get to that, let's talk about the cancellation of a trip that Hegseth was going to take. So, in a move that sure did upset his Israeli handlers, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had to cancel a scheduled meeting in Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, it's unclear specifically why he canceled the trip. We can speculate though, because the trip was planned prior to the war against Iran getting reignited. We are now bombing Iran. And so just to be clear, Hegseth was set to meet with Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz today, Wednesday, but that's not happening. The meeting was to come on the heels of the US carrying out a series of overnight attacks on Iran. Those attacks, by the way, continued into today. You have Keshem Island getting attacked. Bandar Abbas is getting attacked. So the bombings are a lot more intense and a lot more powerful than what we previously saw with the United States. When the MOU was a little fragile 10 days ago, and there were some tit for tat strikes between the US and Iran. Now it appears that the US is motivated to just go back to full-blown war. At least that's what it looks like. Trump is a wild card. You don't know. I mean, he just kind of shoots from the hip. And so we'll see how this plays out. But the fact that the war has been reignited is probably and likely the reason why Hegseth had to cancel his trip. But what's even more interesting is what they were set to discuss. So let's get into that. So Reuters reports that they were supposed to discuss the possible sale of F-35 fighter jets to Turkey with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, an Israeli source told Reuters. And Trump, who's currently at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, with Hegseth, announced just yesterday that he would lift the 2019 sanctions against Turkey in order to pave the way for the sale of the F-35s. Now, you might be wondering, why the hell did we have sanctions against Turkey? We did because Turkey purchased Russian S-400 air defense systems, which we had sanctioned. And Turkey is a NATO ally of ours, so they shouldn't have done that. So during Trump's first term, he's like, well, you violated our sanctions. And so as a result, we're gonna go ahead and sanction you. And so Turkey was effectively kicked out of the F-35 program. And for those of you who don't know what the program is, don't worry, because I didn't know what it was either. So it's the Department of Defense's largest procurement program. Okay, so Lockheed Martin manufactures the aircraft for the U.S. Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy, and international partners and customers. 19 governments have agreed to purchase F-35s. Of those governments, 7 are U.S. allies and considered partners that share the cost of development with the United States. So Turkey, a NATO ally, was removed because of the fact that they had, purchased those Russian air defense systems. But Trump has recently changed his tune entirely, and I'm sure that Netanyahu's not happy about it. Here's what he said during a press conference during the NATO summit. I haven't totally made up my mind, but my inclination is to say, look, he's the Turkish president, or the Turkish president has done everything. He's helped us in so many ways. And you know who else has been good to us? China. Like, okay. China's been good to us. Actually, China has been kind of good to us because when we started the war with Iran, they decided to stop buying oil from the global market and tapped into their strategic petroleum reserves. That's a big deal because had they continued buying oil on the market with all this limited, with the limited supply as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices would have skyrocketed. I mean, think about the population of China. So in some ways, China actually did help. I don't know if they did it intentionally to help us, but either way, there are some things that China has done that I think China deserves some credit for. But nonetheless, this move is sure to have upset the Israelis. Netanyahu, of course, went on CNN to say the following.
He is considering giving the country these planes, F-35s.
Well, as I said, it would destroy the power balance in the Middle East because Turkey, I think, has aggressive aspirations. I mean, they openly say that they want to restore the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire not only included Turkey, it included many other countries. It included Syria, it included pieces of Jordan, it included all of present-day Israel, included some Gulf countries. So this is not a force for peace and stability. And if you give, this kind of radical regime that admittedly smiles to America when it is necessary, or smiles to the president of the United States when it's necessary, when you give him that power, you're going to see aggression in its wake. I wouldn't do that.
So our Secretary of Defense was set to meet with the guy you just heard from, Prime Minister of Israel, to basically discuss weapons procurement for a NATO ally of the United States. Now, look, personally, I don't think these weapons deals should be made at all. And there are other violations, regardless of whether Turkey's our ally or not. Like, you shouldn't be occupying Cyprus, for instance. These types of things are problematic. And if you're an ally of ours, it doesn't mean that you just automatically get approval for certain weaponry, certain fighter jets, things like that. And also, what I'm really curious about here is how this is gonna play out. Because guys, remember, Congress is supposed to be a branch of government that checks the executive branch. So it might appear as though Trump has the capability to do so many things unilaterally, but that's actually not true. And there are ways in which Congress could intervene to prevent the sale of the F-35s to Turkey. So for instance, the sanctions are codified in 2 laws, a provision in the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act and the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. So if Israel, which does not want this sale of F-35s to Turkey to go through, is, able to take advantage of their firm grasp of our Congress thanks to AIPAC funding of our politicians. Do you think Congress might actually, push back against Trump and the sale of these F-35s? I mean, they weren't willing to put up a fight when it came to the war powers resolutions, basically preventing Trump from entering wars without congressional approval. They barely put up a fight at all when it came to that, right? But that was with Israel wanting the war. What happens when Israel does not want the sale of weapons that Trump is trying to pass through unilaterally, but Congress does have an avenue in which they can check the executive branch? Are they going to use that power? And if they do, what does that say? What does that say about their priorities and what motivates them to act? I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. Anyway, super excited for the interview I'm about to do. So stick around to everyone. When we come back, Trita Parsi will be joining us. I have so many questions about the fact that the war has been reignited, but also I just want to kind of get into the finer details about this conflict over the various routes of transit through the Strait of Hormuz. What's really going on here? Who really violated the memorandum of understanding? Stick around. We're going to get those questions answered and more.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney. We covered this story earlier, and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked. My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reform, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like a knitted dragon someone sent me. There's a dragon book they sent me, dragon board games they send me. People have done like custom ironworks, making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
Welcome back to CYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And we've been discussing the reigniting of kinetic warfare between the United States and Iran. And there are still a lot of questions that I have. I'm sure a lot of questions you have in regard to what's really going on in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, who's really violating the memorandum of understanding? And the big question that I've always had from the very beginning of the signing of the memorandum is whether or not the United States has ever really engaged in good faith. So luckily, joining us to answer some of these questions is Trita Parsi, the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. Trita, you are supposed to be on vacation, but for people like you, there's
so much for that.
Yeah, exactly. So I thank you for taking time to speak with us. Yeah. So let's start off with one of your latest pieces. And in this piece on Substack, which everyone should check out, you basically say that this latest kinetic warfare between the United States and Iran is driven by the two states kind of having different interpretations of the terms of the MOU as it pertains to the Strait of Hormuz. Can you describe the two different interpretations and where the conflict is?
Sure. I think first, let me start off by saying it's important to understand that there were ambiguities deliberately put into the MOU just to be able to get it over the finishing line. And then hopefully those ambiguities can be clarified in the subsequent negotiations, but this is not an unusual situation. Of course, you have too many of them and then you don't have an agreement, and then it's just a Swiss cheese. But on this one, it actually seems like it's a genuine differentiation of interpretation. The paragraph in question is paragraph 5. It essentially says that, the Iranians are responsible, although it doesn't use the word responsible, for making sure that the traffic through the region, through the waterways is safe. The Iranians interpret it saying that they're in charge of the strait and that if any ship wants to go through the straits, whether it's the northern or the southern corridor, they need to coordinate this with the Iranians. And the coordination is very simple. They're not charging any fees or anything like that. It's just a notification that they're transiting through this. And this is a temporary solution until there's a final agreement. The U.S. interpretation and the interpretation of many of the GCC states, including those that are actually quite close to Iran, is that it is not saying that Iran alone should be doing this, that Iran does not control the strait, that there is a southern corridor and that's where it goes through Omani waters. And if ship wants to go through that, they can do so without coordinating with the Iranians. Now, the Iranians are very suspicious of this because they fear that southern corridor is deliberately being created in order to make sure that if war resumes, this time around, the Iranians can't close the Strait of Hormuz. And given how important that was as a leverage point for them, they're a bit paranoid about anything being done that will take that away from them. So they have, first time I think was about 12 days ago, they gave a lot of warnings to those ships that were trying to transit without coordinating with them and eventually shot at them. Not in a manner that will destroy them or to kill anyone, but nevertheless, they shot at them. This then led to the US responding militarily. That is the first exchange of fire that we saw post-MOU, which is about 12 or so days ago. After that, there was conversations in which they would come to some sort of a compromise in which essentially all ships would be notifying both Iran as well as the GCC, whoever they designated on the GCC side, of their transit. No fees, nothing like that, but nevertheless, they would give a notification to both sides. That way, the GCC side would be like, well, this doesn't mean that the Iranians are controlling it, and the Iranians would nevertheless be fine with it. Unfortunately, they never finalized that agreement before the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. And as a result, the agreement was not in effect. And then during the funeral, a couple of ships were trying to transit through the southern corridor without coordinating with the Iranians. And the Iranians perceived this as a provocation that was done when the Iranians were distracted with the funeral. And after numerous warnings, they shot at them. And then that's when we saw the U.S. side responding yesterday. And now the U.S. is attacking again as we are talking. And I think there is a way to still get back to that formulation that almost was reached earlier on. But it is getting, frankly, quite silly because it frankly doesn't matter who is in control or whatever the arrangement is in this intermediate period. It's the final deal that is of importance. But both sides are so suspicious of each other and fearing that anything that happens during this period is decisive in determining what the final outcome is. And again, the Iranians are very paranoid about this because of a fear that this will be used in a way that will take away the strait from them. And if they don't have the strait, they're in a much, much weaker position if the U.S. decides to go to war again. And of course, based on how the U.S. has behaved, the Iranians believe that that likelihood is pretty significant.
I mean, I'm actually glad that they have that paranoia because I think that they are paranoid for reasons that certainly have merit. I mean, look, the United States has really given Iran no reason to trust us, right? And when I say us, I mean our government, our negotiators. You know, Iran engages in peace negotiations with the U.S. The U.S. carries out surprise strikes against Iran twice in the middle of those peace negotiations. And then you have moments of shocking honesty by members of Trump's administration. In fact, I want to go to this video of Vice President J.D. Vance, which, you know, I allowed myself to have a little bit of optimism that maybe the Trump administration is engaging in good faith to some extent. That has been completely wiped away, especially after I saw this. Take a look.
So I think what the president has told us to do is use this MOU to sort of refill the world's oil economy, to refill some stocks, and then to see where the hand is.
Trita, how do you not pull your hair out of your head, right? Because like you're so, and it's a good thing, you're so optimistic. And I'm not. Like, I think the worst of this administration because they've given me no reason to believe that they ever engage in good faith. And then you have the vice president just saying it like, you know, basically this is a trick because we need to get the oil flowing. But now it seems as though our military feels better prepared to start kinetic warfare with Iran again. Remember, we're running out of missile interceptors. We're running out of our strategic petroleum reserve. I don't know. I don't think that they were actually pursuing peace here. What do you think?
Yeah. So look, I think the way you interpret it is a completely legitimate way of looking at it. The way it is expressed certainly can easily leave one with that impression. I think there's a different way of interpreting it as well, though. And I'm not saying either one of them is right or wrong. But look, there is no scenario in which the United States or Iran would go into any of these negotiations with only a plan A. They would go into this in a manner to make sure that they will come out of it with a plan B and a plan C if plan A doesn't work out.
Even the Trump administration? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but even the Trump administration.
Even the Trump administration. And I can assure you, I'm sure the Iranians have a plan B. This is part of the reason why they're so sensitive about the Strait of Hormuz, because of their plan B. If they lose control over it, which they fear they will do if this southern corridor becomes normalized, then that will undermine their plan B. So I think one has to understand that both sides are going to come into this and pursue their plan A in a manner that also leaves them with a decent plan B. So I think there's a way of interpreting what he's saying that is the case, that they're like, okay, let's give diplomacy a shot, see if it works. In the meantime, let's restock the oil inventory, et cetera, and make sure that we don't end up in a scenario in which the oil markets are going to be in a complete chaotic situation if war resumes. I think that is one way of looking at it. Now, but if you add additional data to it, I think it makes it more difficult to have too strong of a negative reaction to what he says. Because first of all, when the war started, by happenstance, oil inventory actually was very high. That's part of the reason why oil prices never went up as high as they could have gone. And there's just no way that in just a couple of weeks, the inventory is going to be refilled in that manner. Because you still have problems actually getting ships out of the Strait of Hormuz, not because of them being fired at, but because just of the logistical issue of getting the large number of ships that have been stuck there out of the Persian Gulf. So even if this is the plan, it's not a plan for the short term. It's a plan for at least the medium term. It's going to take several months, perhaps a year to get back to that right place. And even if that happens, so what? At the end of the day, if the United States actually has a functioning military option that could work, Trump is much better off using it right now before the midterm elections and then go into the elections with a military victory. The reason why this is not happening is because there is none. There is no great, fast military option that comes out of it. Now, does that mean that there won't be an effort to prepare themselves better in case it leads to that scenario? I think that is not illogical for them to do. Speaking about it in this way definitely leaves the impression that perhaps plan B is the actual plan A. But again, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense because we tried that plan B. It sucks. It's terrible. It didn't work out. And a couple of weeks of oil flow from the Persian Gulf is not going to make much of a difference.
I'm curious if you've heard anything from the Omani side of this whole debacle, because remember, this route that is unapproved by the Iranians travels closer to the Omani shore. So, I mean, if it's Omani waters, isn't that something that would upset Oman if Iran is trying to prevent transit through that route?
So the Omanis are kind of stuck in a situation in which they've tried to come up with a decent proposal. And one of them actually was the one in which there wouldn't be a fee, there wouldn't be a toll, but there would be some sort of administrative, environmental fee, et cetera, that would be charged. And it wouldn't necessarily just be Iran and Oman, it could be other states. And reality is that it's very likely to end up like that. But when the Omanis get a little bit too far ahead of the US, that's when the Trump administration reacts very, very harshly. And we saw Trump even threatening to bomb Oman. It was only one statement, but nevertheless, it sent shockwaves because at first it wasn't clear. Did he misspeak? Did he talk about Iran and said Oman instead? I mean, he called it the Islamic Republic of Japan today. So it is, it is plausible that he misspoke, but it appears actually as if he didn't. And that there's a lot of anger, particularly in the Rubio side of the administration, that felt that the Omanis were getting too close to the Iranian position on this issue. At the end of the day, the Omanis have not fared terribly in this war. This is in some ways strengthening their position within the GCC. They may be out of line with some of the other GCC states, particularly the UAE, but this has really weakened the UAE within the GCC, and the UAE and Omanis have had tensions for quite some time. The Strait is becoming much more of a geopolitical position, leverage point, which is not only important and valuable to the Iranians, but automatically will become valuable for the Omanis as well. But I don't think they in any way, shape, or form want to see this go back towards a shooting war, which is what we're seeing right now. That would be terrible for them. But it's important to understand many of the other GCC states, not just the Emiratis, but also the Saudis and the Qataris, don't want an interim situation in which everything has to be coordinated through Iran, because they're fearful that that will just set a new scenario in which the Iranians will be in control of the Strait going forward. And the Iranians have, of course, the exact opposite fear.
Okay, so final question for you, because this is, I think if the United States and Israel, maybe even some of the Gulf countries, are genuinely concerned about Iran pursuing nuclear weapons, wouldn't one argue that Iran doesn't need to pursue nuclear weapons when they have an economic nuke? And wouldn't you rather, pay whatever nominal fee you'd have to pay to transit through the Strait in order to prevent the big scary situation in which Iran pursues a nuclear weapon, which I've been clear and honest with my audience. I personally don't care about that. I think we have all sorts of nuclear armed countries that I wish weren't nuclear armed, and they are, Israel being at the top of that list. But nonetheless, if these countries are genuinely concerned about nuclear weapons, wouldn't they just think, all right, fine, let them control or have leverage through the Strait of Hormuz as opposed to a nuclear deterrent?
The issue, though, Anna, is that it is not an either or. It's not a scenario in which they control the strait. Automatically, the Iranians would then be like, well, we don't need to have a nuclear program now because we have the strait. So the fear on the GCC side, or at least in some of the GCC capitals, is that this would give Iran massive geopolitical weight without there first having been some sort of arrangement between them in which their rapprochement can be on more even terms from their perspective. And at the same time, it doesn't do anything necessarily in and of itself as to whether the Iranians pursue a nuclear weapon or not. Now, of course, it's very important to remind ourselves in this conversation, there's no evidence that the Iranians were pursuing a nuclear weapons program. Again, the U.S. intelligence is clear on this, even under the Trump administration, made it very clear that they have not made a political decision to build a nuclear weapon. And whereas some of the other states have made it very clear that if the Iranians build a nuclear weapon, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia said this before he died, that if the Iranians build a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will build one as well. So which is a clear statement of intent towards building a nuclear weapon, whereas the Iranians have always said that they're not looking for that. Now, whether that is true or not is a different story.
So fascinating. All right, we're going to have to talk about your thoughts on the Abraham Accords at another time. We're out of time right now, but thank you so much, Trita. You're
Thanks
amazing.
so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And everyone check out his Substack. He writes regularly, and your insights are always so valuable to me. So thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief break. And when we come back, we've got a lot more news to get to. So stick around. We'll talk about the impending investor war on Palantir. Is that real? The Financial Times seems to think so. We'll be right back. So for all of our members and our Twitch subscribers, if you've written in and you're worried I'm not going to read your comment, have no fear. I'm going to read a bunch of comments in our members only bonus. But for our super chatters, since you guys might not be members, I want to make sure I do right by you and read your comments. So let's go to Jed Cusack, who says, is TYT to address the real corruption in the UK? Nigel Farage campaigns against illegal aliens, and now he's facing an actual alien. How can an alien stand? I know a little bit about what's going on in the UK. I don't know if that was a joke. I don't know, but I will. It's hard because look, every time the UK and immigration comes up, I want to like rip my hair out of my head because it's like, why do you think refugee crises happen? And then like the very politicians who exploit whatever frustration, fear, whatever about mass immigration events, they never talk about the core of the issue, which is the foreign policy that the West supports in the Middle East. But I'll look into it and see if we can cover it tomorrow. But thank you for the suggestion. Throbbing 37 Pakistani American says, Anna, this is relevant, but overall, these corporate media outlets turn Palestine coverage into biased propaganda. Fox goes full war hawk. Israel has no choice, while CNN hides behind neutral context that seems to favor one side. Both push narratives that ignore key context daily. Even CNN reported, I'll read the rest of your comment when we come back. So during our social break, I was reading one of the super chats from Throbbing 37 Pakistani American, that's the handle. And the comment was about the pretty intense bias that we see in our legacy and corporate media in regard to any conflict that transpires in the Middle East, especially. But honestly, across the board, you will notice like a pro-corporate, pro-establishment bias. I wanted to read the rest of your comment where you said even CNN reported yesterday's strike on the elementary school was with outdated intel or sources. US general bypasses alert about stale data, martyring over 160 5 little girls and staff. Yeah. I know it's what's really interesting is that disconnect that you'll notice in legacy media where every once in a while there's like a golden nugget, right? Like reporting that's genuinely valuable. And CNN's the one that did the original reporting on the military using outdated intel. And in fact, being flagged that the intel was outdated, but they decided to carry out the strikes anyway without vetting that intel. And then Dana Bash interviews Netanyahu as if he's not a war criminal who's wanted by the International Criminal Court. Like it's just that disconnect exists, and you have to be able to reject the bad reporting, reject the bias, and try to find those nuggets of really important information. Because look, at the end of the day, whether you love CNN or hate CNN, we need original reporting, and they do some of it. Okay, some of it's great, some of it seems to have an agenda, but I think with enough reading, with enough research, you kind of know how to suss out the trashy reporting. Anyway, let's go to Dallas Digital Production 393. Happy birthday, Anna. Best wishes, beautiful lady. Thank you so much. Turned 40 yesterday, which is a thing that happens, I guess, to people who, are fortunate. It's a very fortunate thing to happen, to get older, to be healthy. I'm gonna see it that way. Let's go to James Kelly. So Donnie T chose the chose the F it let the world burn option. He must have got some bad election news. I mean, certainly. It's literally 1984 says, as the UK learned from Brexit, you can't trade selectively with EU nations. It's all or nothing. Yes, that's exactly right. So that's one of the other things that could stop Trump from unilaterally ending all trade with an EU state like Spain. James Kelly also says, it's interesting. Spain has been pretty outspoken against the genocide as well. I can't believe I forgot to mention that, but it's true. That has really upset them. In fact, they've been outspoken about the genocide. They've also been outspoken against the war against Iran and won't allow the United States to use the bases in their own country. Anthony writes, also a happy belated birthday. May God bless you with many more. Anthony, that's super sweet. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. Okay. Let's talk about what's going on with Palantir. I literally paid for a Financial Times subscription just so I could read this story because, man, all of those little tricks to get through the firewall or the paywall, the FT has got their paywall game locked down. So that's how much I care about the story, and I think you guys are going to enjoy learning about it as well. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hopefully I'm annoying you as much as 10 years ago, or more.
You sound pretty angry.
No, this is the voice of American business that is being channeled through me. I am the most publicly supportive CEO of Israel.
We're still on camera.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well great. That's true. And I'll tell you, we're off camera now.
No, we're still going.
That was Palantir's CEO. Okay, that's Alex Karp. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with Alex Karp. But it turns out that some of Palantir's investors who have decided to now short Palantir stock have seen Alex Karp as a bit of a liability. And honestly, I think they're probably right about that. He gives people the ick, as the kids like to say. So let's get to the details here because in a pretty extensive FT Financial Times report, they went out of their way to speak to 20 current and former Palantir employees, executives, investors, and also advisors. And here's what they found. Almost all supporters and critics of Palantir alike agreed on one thing. Some of the company's woes are self-inflicted. And believe it or not, the company is suffering from some woes, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Now, keep in mind that people like us, actually, we the people, the American people, happen to be Palantir's largest funders. You might be wondering, how is that possible? Well, the U.S. Department of Defense has granted Palantir a total of $10 billion worth of government contracts. So there's that. Also, in the 12-month period following Trump's return to office, its revenue from federal contracts soared to nearly $2.2 billion, a 65% increase on the previous year. The company's commercial business revenue more than doubled year on year. So, they were doing real well in the very beginning of Trump's second term. However, something did change. In the US, Palantir is now so radioactive that Democratic candidates have felt compelled to sell even small stakes in the group and return donations from those associated with it. Across Europe, doors once open to Palantir in London, Paris, or Zurich have been slammed firmly shut. And I love that. That is basically what you're seeing is governments reacting or responding to people who find Alex Karp repulsive, Palantir's entire mission repulsive. They don't like the surveillance. They don't like the data gathering. And there's a bit of a revolt beginning to percolate. And I don't want to oversell it because I don't personally think it's where it needs to be. But this could be the beginning of something beautiful. So Palantir, like public opinion toward Palantir, has been declining for some time now. And it's shown in how much value the company actually lost in the stock market this year. So remember, Trump comes in and their stock soars. They're doing really well. But then suddenly you start seeing this pretty significant dip. So let's put this graph up on the screen so you can understand what I'm talking about here. So as the FT writes, Palantir's stock skyrocketed in the first year of Trump's second term. In fact, several Palantir employees went into the Trump administration, including Gregory Barbacia, who became the chief information officer for the entire federal government in January of 2025. But as you can see at the, more recent reading of the stock prices or value, it lost nearly a quarter of its value so far this year because investors have been short selling Palantir stock. They believe that the company is overvalued. They think the company is vulnerable to increased competition from other AI companies that are, they're starting to poach employees from Palantir. And they're also worried that, these AI companies actually do serve as better competition to Palantir. So in other words, analysts are saying short the stock, and you're seeing that actually be carried out by investors shorting the stock. So everyone hates Palantir, and here's why, okay? So Palantir has provided fodder for fears of mass surveillance in the AI age. They brag about it, in fact. They've become a major defense contractor that's closely tied to the genocide in Gaza. People are not happy about that. And Palantir collaborates with both local and federal law enforcement, sometimes to a very ghoulish and invasive degree, where Americans feel that they're being indiscriminately surveilled and stalked by our government or law enforcement agencies. And the company even emphasizes its connections to the CIA. Like, ain't nobody gonna like you when you're cozying up with a bunch of spooks, right? And so take, for example, I'm gonna give you one specific example that's actually outlined in this FT piece. I mean, you gotta have like a modicum of concern about your public relations, but not Palantir. They can't help themselves. So after Renee Good was shot and killed by ICE officials as she was in her car attempting to flee, Palantir decided to put out a video, which was particularly disgusting, almost like celebrating that a mother of three who was protesting mass deportations or protesting, militarized federal agents on the streets of Minneapolis, like she deserved to get killed. It was disgusting. So what did they do? Palantir's head of strategic engagement posted on social media an AI-generated video set to a music track called Clubbed to Death. It featured the logo of the company in the midst of a cultist circle alongside images of the Grim Reaper, a blood-soaked crucifix, all-seeing eyes, and the mysterious slogan, "Recon is watching you." Yeah, that's not conducive to getting people to like your company and want to support it. Like who would think that was a good idea? But they did it, right? So Palantir essentially is positioning itself as an adversary to the American people while receiving the bulk of its funding from the American people, thanks to our corrupt government. That's what's happening right now. By the way, Palantir, Peter Thiel, who's co-founder of Palantir, created JD Vance in a petri dish, and that's an important thing to remember as he gets sold by the Republican establishment as an anti-interventionist, super modern conservative, super cool modern conservative, right? Anyway, the head of strategic engagement at Palantir is a man by the name of Eliano Yonis, and he's insane. When one person on Reddit complained that the January video had 1984 vibes, he responded, "We don't care." I guess we should celebrate the fact that he didn't say that was the point, because that seems to have been the point. And apparently some of the employees totally freaked out after that video was posted online. The company had an absolute internal meltdown, recalls one former employee who watched the dispute erupt on an internal messaging platform. You had people being like, my customer is a children's hospital. How am I supposed to explain this to them? But it seems Palantir's culture is pretty set. So I'll give you another example. Joe Lonsdale, who's that? A Palantir co-founder turned MAGA mega donor who hosts fundraisers for Vice President JD Vance, relevant, called for the return of public hangings and suggested the company was founded to fight commies. Okay, can you imagine seeing everything that's going on right now with our government, with the undue influence Israel has over our government, and genuinely think that the real threat right now is commies? Why? Because a few socialists got elected in New York? Like, that ain't gonna happen in pretty much any other part of the country. Maybe California, maybe. But that's still a big maybe. Like, commies, that's what you're worried about? Okay. But these people love Israel. They love the Israelification of our military because they benefit from it. They profit off of it. And it looks like some employees have been fleeing, which is probably speaking to the fears that investors have, which is why they're shorting Palantir stock. And I love it. So basically the group, Palantir essentially, which declared worldwide staff of 4,429 in December of 2025, has lost more than 6 experienced engineers to the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI over the past year. And then you have Palantir's psychotic chief executive. You think we weren't going to fixate on Alex Karp a little? Well, we're going to fixate. Of course we are. If you're unfamiliar with Alex Karp, get to know him. Take a look.
So the primary source of death in Palestine is the fact that Hamas has realized that there are millions and millions of useful idiots that will.
Using that excuse, this is why you don't get left to speak, because you are killing my people and you're justifying it because of Hamas or anyone else.
Can we get security up there?
Your AI and your technology from Palantir kills Palestinians.
Mostly terrorists. That's true.
Most of the people who have been slaughtered by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza with the use of Palantir technology, by the way, have been civilians. Considering the fact that half the population, more than half the population in Gaza was under the age of 18 at the start of the genocide, gives you a sense that, a lot of kids got killed. But Alex Karp thinks they're all terrorists. Yeah, he's he's making money off of it. So like, why are you complaining? This is great. Let's just pretend like the kids are terrorists and they deserve to get slaughtered. Those toddlers, they deserve to get bullets in their heads by IDF snipers. They deserved it, right? Piece of crap. Anyway, so he has boasted that Palantir tools kill people. He has republished a manifesto that calls for Silicon Valley technologists, as he calls it, to be deployed in the fight against urban crime. Now, let me just be clear about something. I think when crime spikes, it is a problem and it should be taken seriously. I don't want companies like Palantir to sell their mass surveillance BS to either state, local, or federal governments. Because clearly what it ends up doing is basically punishing everyone in said community indiscriminately with mass surveillance, mass data gathering. If you haven't committed a crime, why should you get sucked into this like weird, mass surveillance dystopian world that they're trying to build because they profit off of it? That's insane. On top of that, executives have even warned that their CEO Alex Karp's 2025 book, The Technological Republic, which accused American allies of self-righteousness, would complicate its growth strategy in Europe and deepen the company's dependency on the US. Karp began boasting that Palantir's tools were used to kill enemies. The Wall Street told Wall Street analysts who tried to screw the company they deserve to be sprayed with light fentanyl-laced urine, and declared the truly progressive position on immigration to be extreme skepticism. So these tactics have led to consequences for Palantir. And I just hope that Alex Karp keeps talking. Just keep talking. Please, keep going to these conferences, keep running your mouth. July 1st, he had a lengthy interview on CNBC where he sounded like a lunatic. It was great. I actually really appreciate it. So more of that, please. Now, the real question is, will Palantir ever deal with any regulations, any oversight by Congress? And the cutest thing in the world is that the FT, which I believe is a publication based in the UK, is cute enough to believe that once the Democrats get elected, oh yeah, all of a sudden there's a cop on the beat. It's hilarious and delusional. Why do I say that? Well, because federal records show a majority of donations, over $200 made by US employees of Palantir in 2024, went to Democrats, as in previous election cycles. Karp himself donated to Joe Biden's campaign, and in 2024, he said he was voting against Trump. They don't care about political party. They will buy you, okay? Or at least attempt to buy you. And a lot of our politicians are not at all principled people. They'll take the money and they will do as they're told. So yeah, are Democrats gonna hold Palantir accountable? They might do some kabuki theater with their congressional hearings, but will they actually do anything? Of course not. The company is apparently bracing for a reckoning anyway, though. In the past few months, it has quietly hired several Democratic-aligned lobbyists, including a former Democratic Senator, Mark Begich, in anticipation of being hauled on to Capitol Hill if Republicans are forced to hand over the gavel. That's assuming, the Democrats take control of the House after the midterms. But I think it's so cute that Palantir's like, oh, well, we gotta be prepared just in case. We gotta be prepared for the kabuki theater that we're gonna engage in with these hearings, which will amount to nothing. I expect we'll be spending a lot of time with our right hands in the air, says one Palantir advisor, referring to oaths sworn before congressional committees. But again, the hearings are one thing. It's an opportunity for these politicians to perform and give you the illusion of governance. What comes afterward? And we all know nothing comes afterward. Anyway, we got to take our final break. When we come back, we'll talk a little more about Big Brother. We've got another story involving ICE. You don't want to miss that. Come right back. Okay. All All right, I love you guys so much. Thank you to our live viewers. You guys are amazing. Fat Voltron says, Anna, love your epic FU ratio on X. We will be talking about that in detail during our bonus episode for our members. So definitely tune in for that. Callie Millie says, I turned 40 on June 7th and have been struggling. Hearing your response to a chat changed my perspective. I'm reframing negative thoughts to how fortunate I am to be healthy and alive. Thank you. You know, look, I'm not gonna lie. Who wants to get older? No one wants to get older. But if you're in your 40s and you're healthy, you're active, like I had a little shuffle session, before the show today, got a little exercise. I'm like, I'm feeling good. And that's all that matters. Age is a number. The way you feel, the way you take care of your body, that's way more important. Anyway, let's get back to some of our member comments. User C4Y1D is a new member. Thank you to you for becoming a new member, and I hope you enjoy the perks of membership. Ronald Fan in our member section says, hey, TYT family, and to you, Solo Anna, Trump wants more endless war and making Americans trouble again. If we don't brainstorm, how can we decouple? Trump is a big mouth liar and a smoking gun. I think the best thing Americans can do is unite. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you with our final segment before we head on over to our bonus episode for our members. If you are a member, just stick around. You will be we're gonna have some fun today. We're not gonna do hardcore, straight news reporting or anything like that. We're gonna talk about some fun stuff. And if you wanna become a member, tyt.com/join, or you can hit that join button if you're watching us on YouTube and become a member that way. All right, I'm also gonna read a bunch of member comments from our Twitch community. So for those of you who have written in and I haven't had time to get to your comments yet, have no fear. I promise you, we will be reading some of your reactions, thoughts, concerns during our bonus episode. Okay, but for now, I want to talk a little bit about what the Trump administration is doing to skirt certain oversight and regulations. So, the Trump administration has just spent $1.5 billion in American taxpayer money in order to purchase 2 private prisons, which will be turned into ICE detention facilities. But here's the catch. These private prisons, which were sold to the federal government by private prison company CoreCivic, will continue to be privately run, but publicly funded. So privately run, publicly funded. We are gonna shell out the money, but we are going to have less control and oversight of these detention facilities, which, by the way, have some pretty significant human rights abuse complaints against it, labor complaints against it. So if you happen to be one of those Americans who doesn't care about human rights abuses against human beings simply because they are undocumented, they abuse Americans too. In fact, private prisons have a long history of abusing American, inmates. So this is a big problem because the reason why the federal government did this is partly because they don't want to deal with certain oversight that would be required of them in the state of California. So let's get to the details here. Now, DHS bought the 2 Southern California prisons, the Otay Mesa Detention Center and California City Detention Center, for about $1.5 billion. But the facilities will still be operated by CoreCivic employees, meaning the company will still generate income over and above the sale price from both prisons. So what does that mean? What differentiates these private prisons from publicly funded and operated public prisons is that even though they're still publicly funded, they are run by private companies that have like a board of investors. So do you understand what that means? That means that it is a business model that seeks to profit off the detention of human beings. If you make more profit, by the way, in the form of government contracts, by imprisoning more people or detaining more people, then you're going to lobby for rules or laws, regulations that would allow for the detention of more and more people. So even though this story is under the context of immigration enforcement, this is a big problem that affects Americans across the board in countries, in states that actually have these private prison facilities. So California requires private detention centers to undergo certain oversight, but those oversight efforts will actually be far more difficult to carry out because the federal government now owns these buildings. So the purchase could protect the detention facilities from, certain legal pursuits to ensure that they're following the law. So that, by the way, includes the fact that they could now evade, ICE could now evade state monitoring in these detention facilities. Lawsuits that accuse the facilities of carrying out abuse or human rights violations, or even labor violations, which of course would impact Americans who are working at these facilities. Additionally, federally owned buildings tend to get more favorability in court proceedings. And if you're wondering, well, okay, Anna, like it sounds like you're fear mongering. Please tell me how these facilities are abusive. Like, how are they different from publicly run and owned facilities, which are also pretty abusive? Well, these tend to be a lot worse. And because of the way that they're shielded from certain regulation, it's a big problem. So ICE facilities across the country, both privately and publicly owned, have been slammed with lawsuits over detainee mistreatment, forced labor, health code violations, and deaths in custody. And guys, the number of deaths in these facilities under the Trump administration, it's really skyrocketed, and it's really terrifying stuff. So at least 21 people have died in ICE custody this year. And that's data collected by lawyer and journalist Andrew Free. And then the number of people detained by ICE has skyrocketed from 45,000 last year to more than 63,000 as of this week. So they are detaining more and more people. And look, I mean, the federal agents who are heavily armed aren't really like roaming the streets like they were before after the Renee Good and Alex Preddy killings. They stopped doing that. But that doesn't mean that people aren't being detained. Actually, the number of people who are now in detention, in ICE detention, has increased significantly. And so altogether, ICE is actively working to insulate itself from any sort of oversight or accountability. And that's a problem. We should want oversight and accountability in these facilities. We should not be the type of country that believes individuals who have not committed any violent crime, have not done anything other than maybe overstay their visa. I don't want to live in a country that thinks those types of people need to be detained and abused and tortured. I think we should be better than that, way better than that. And if we look at a country like Israel with disgust, we shouldn't want to mirror their type of behavior. But with that in mind, these types of abuses never just impact whoever the government is fear-mongering about. These types of abuses always end up boomeranging to impact Americans negatively. And in fact, we are already seeing that. Of course, we have the Renee Good and Alex Preddy shootings, killings. That was pretty bad to begin with. But what about those who are critical of ICE agents? Well, ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility is basically a sub-agency that was specifically meant to conduct internal investigations. It's an internal watchdog group. They were supposed to, inspect detention facilities, investigate allegations of employee and contractor misconduct, process security checks for new applicants. Seems pretty important, right? Well, now under the Trump administration, it appears that they're doing something entirely different. The OPR is actually investigating American citizens who have been overly critical in their view of ICE online. So understand something, we are paying for these people's salaries. And they've declared war against Americans who are hurting their feelings. So they're exaggerating about why they're doing this. They claim, oh, their lives are in danger. I mean, they're like heavily armed federal agents, and they're talking about, oh, we're so afraid, we're being doxxed online. By the way, how many people have doxxed my freaking husband online because they don't like my commentary about Israel? Federal government couldn't care less. Totally innocent guy, hasn't even freaking said a damn thing about politics. But Laura Loomer, in her jacked up face, can say whatever she wants. She can dox people on a daily basis, gets away with it. But when it comes to heavily armed federal agents who might be abusing their power, oh, Americans can't be critical of that. You're gonna literally have federal agents knocking on your door following a ridiculous investigation. So let's get to those details. So between January 2025 and March of this year, OPR investigated 131 cases of criticism against ICE. Not because they wanted to see if the criticism was valid and they should do something to improve, but because they wanted to punish the critics. So OPR called these incidents of doxing and threats directed towards ICE employees nationwide. And it is unknown whether any of these cases actually resulted in legitimate criminal charges, but the Trump administration, without a shred of evidence, claims that threats against ICE have increased 1,000%. Meanwhile, there have been multiple troubling incidents involving ICE critics. So there's a guy named David Strever who sent a harsh email to ICE, no threat, just complaining about how ICE is conducting itself. Now he's actually the former acting director. He sent the letter to the former acting director of ICE. And then 5 months later, ICE agents show up at his house. He was on vacation with his daughter, but his wife was home. And so the ICE agents decided to interrogate his wife over a harshly worded email he wrote, okay. And then when David landed back here in the United States, DHS showed up at his hotel to question him. So ICE and DHS are going the extra mile. They have been waging a crackdown on alleged threats against their personnel and doxing attempts. Federal agents have sent administrative subpoenas to email and social media platforms to find out the identities of people who have posted about ICE anonymously. And let me just pause to say something that I shouldn't even have to say, but because it's so obvious, but I'm gonna say it. If you are actually issuing a very specific threat, like you contact an ICE agent and you say, this is your address and I'm coming to kill you, obviously that is something that's gonna be investigated, and rightfully so. But there has been no shred of evidence that this is what these investigations were about. And so they have the money to do surveillance and investigation of American citizens, and they've been getting away with it. Like the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE and Border Patrol, is using a broad web of surveillance tools purchased as its budget has ballooned under this administration. And they're doing it to monitor, apprehend, and intimidate both the people it seeks to deport and the US citizens critical of its policies in the real world and online. So if you look at this graph, you'll get a sense of just how much the ICE budget ballooned in fiscal year 2025. I mean, just look at that giant spike. And these are all funds that have been allocated through the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Laura Moraff, who is a staff attorney over at the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, pointed out how the First Amendment is being violated here, which seemed to be an important rallying cry during the 2024 elections. But so many people who purported to care about free speech now engage in the retaliatory nature of the Trump administration when we engage in speech they don't like. Nonetheless, here's what Laura Moraff said. It takes a lot to actually convict someone for their speech, and it's only possible in very limited circumstances. People do have First Amendment rights to criticize the government and to do that online and to do that anonymously. So she's right about that. I think that the reality here is that these types of ICE-led investigations into American citizens who are critical of them, it's just meant to have a chilling effect. You get a DHS agent knocking on your door and asking you questions about a strongly worded email you sent to ICE. that might terrify you into silence. And that's what they want. So the most important thing for Americans to know is what they are protected through our Constitution to do. And don't let them chill your speech. Know your rights and don't let them silence you, because this is unacceptable. And know your rights when any law enforcement, whether it's a Fed or local law enforcement, knocks on your door. They don't have a warrant, they don't get to enter. So just something to keep in mind, guys, because I do think that this is more about a chilling effect on free speech than anything else. Anyway, we're gonna have a lot of fun in the bonus episode for our members. I'm so excited. I'll read a lot of your comments. I know today's show is a little bit hectic and I wanted to kind of cram in as much news as possible, but don't worry, I'm gonna read and respond to a lot of what you guys have written in. And then also we have some videos from Trump at the NATO summit that really makes one wonder about why we keep electing people like close to their 80s or in their 80s. It's like not a good idea, you know? But more importantly, we're gonna talk about how much I hurt Benjamin Netanyahu's feelings. It is amazing how fascistic war criminals are like these big tough guys when it comes to like slaughtering children. But heaven forbid you hurt his feelings on X. So I'll show you what his reaction was to something that I've noticed that people like when I just shoot from the hip and don't think before I post something. It happened with the AOC thing. It definitely happened with this 4th of July message that I had for Netanyahu. So tyt.com/join to become a member. And for our members, I'll see you there.